All right, welcome back to Virtual School Assembly. Today our guest is Tammy Cunnington. Tammy was injured in a plane crash nearly 40 years ago when she was just six years old. From near death at 6, she became a Paralympian at age 40. Tammy brings a message of perseverance, resilience, and encouragement. She's represented Canada at various World Championships, Pan Am Games, and the 2016 Paralympics in Rio. She's earned 4 Canadian records, 1 world record, and has been a member of Team Canada for 4 years now. And that might be 5 years now, I think. We'll get to that in a minute. Tammy is an ambassador for Fast and Female and the Rick Hansen Foundation, and volunteers with Canadian Blood Services and the Ronald McDonald House. She's keeping exceedingly busy. Tammy, we are glad you made a few minutes for us today. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So I blundered this on the bio, but it says Team Canada for 4 years. Is that right,
Yeah.
or is it? Has it
No,
been longer?
it's more like 6 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? I don't know what Team Canada is.
It just means that I've been a carded athlete in Canada. We call it carding, and it's our basically government funding to train and being. Once you get that carding, then you're considered to be on the national team.
Okay, and so that happened back 2015, 2016 when you started competing as a pro?
Yes.
Cool. All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get back. We want to hear your story first. So this airplane crash that you were in, explain that. You were 6 years old. Give us kind of the context for that.
Okay, so when I was 6, I lived in a really small town in Alberta, and they were having what was called a fly-in breakfast, which was like a little tiny air show. And it was a fundraising event for my figure skating club. So we were going there to cook pancakes and have this pancake breakfast to make some money for some kind of competition we had coming up. And unfortunately that day there was a lot of wind and things going on with the weather. And like a newly licensed pilot flying a small plane. And when he got caught in the wind as he came to land, his lack of experience led him to not know what to do, and he crashed. And so he crashed his plane into other planes that were on the ground, and then crashed into me, and he ran over my brother's leg and broke his femur. And then when he hit me, I had more significant injuries than that, that in the long run left me in a chair and with only partial use of my left arm as well.
Wow. So you were just bystanders. You were just there, and it was a chain reaction and led to you being in the hospital for a long time. So talk about kind of that rehabilitation. How long were you in the hospital, and what was that like as a 6-year-old? I mean, everyone else is going to kindergarten, first grade. What was that experience like for you?
It was interesting there. I have some memories very early, like because of where I lived, the hospital was too small, so I was sent on to bigger centers, and then ultimately that day, I think that same day, I was flown to Vancouver before we had helicopter ambulances, but they had jet ambulances, and I was taken to Vancouver. I spent 2 or 3 weeks out there initially and had basically 17 operations in that 2 weeks. So most of the time I was just in surgery, and I just have, of course, brief memories of those days out there, little things, little burps that pop up and things. And then I was brought back to a big city closer to my home, brought back to Edmonton, and I was in a hospital there. And in the end, that was about a year before I was went home more permanently. I still went back to the hospital in between once I got home, but that first year was just just complete, basically still survival. They didn't know yet if I was going to live or what my quality of life would be, so it was still just survival, going from having all these surgeries to being able to be on a stretcher for a while, and then finally getting into a wheelchair. So that first year was like that. And I spent a lot of time by myself because my mom and dad had 3 other kids, and so they still had to be home. My dad needed to work, and mom needed to look after everybody else. So it was a bit kind of a quick growing up experience because I spent a lot of that time by myself. And then once I came home, the rehab just kind of continued in a different way. I still had some surgeries in the summers when I was off school, and physiotherapy, and just every day building back, like learning how to do things with one hand, learning how to be in my chair, all of that kind of thing.
Right. So this is a bit of a stretch, but as a country, or as a world, I should say, have gone through this pandemic where we're talking now about the new normal, and people get really upset by that title. We don't know how the world's going to change in the next few months or years, but we know that there will be changes. Now, when you were 6 years old, you had to adjust to a new normal for you, and it meant rehabbing and physical therapy probably for the rest of your life. As you adjusted to that as a 6-year-old, now, fortunately, you were young enough that I think you were a little more resilient than older people might be, but you still had to make some major adjustments, as did your whole family, to accommodate some of the things that you were going through. What kind of advice would you give kids right now, looking, obviously their situation isn't as dire or drastic as the one you face, but what advice would you give kids looking forward that are dreading the future, that think, I can never adjust to this new normal?
I think we really talk a lot in high performance sport about being adaptable and having really great adaptability. And, it sounds just like words when we talk about it, but it really is key to just be able to know that things are always going to be changing, and the easiest way to go through that change is just to embrace it and just to know that it's part of life. And I think especially in this moment, we can really reflect that, basically the entire world is going through the same thing together. So it's a little bit different, because you can think, well, there are people who are in lockdown who live in worse situations than we do, so they're having a harder time, than we are, or just that you can just really relate that I'm not doing this alone. Everyone's doing this. So, draw on other people around you who are coping really well, or who are looking for the future and learning, and just really finding ways to roll with it and find the positives, and find, like I said, find that adaptability, find that ability to just be like, okay, yeah, life is different, but doesn't mean it's worse, doesn't mean it's better, doesn't mean it's the same, just, well, obviously it doesn't mean it's the same, but life is just different, and just to roll with it and find ways to make it still what they want.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective, and especially coming from someone who didn't just adjust and adapt, but you learned to thrive in difficult situations. So let's talk a little bit about kind of those formative years as you grew up and went from elementary school into middle school and high school. You started getting involved in athletics. How did that come about, and what was your first foray into sports like?
Well, my family are all really athletic, and we lived in a very active life. So prior to my injury, I had been a figure skater, and so it was just kind of part of our upbringing to be part of sports. So after I had recovered enough to be able to start to do things and get more involved in activities, my parents sent me to a sports camp, same in Edmonton, the city nearest us, and it gave me the chance to try all different types of wheelchair sports, as well as to interact with other kids who had different disabilities, because I lived in a small town, so I was basically the only kid in my school who, definitely the only one in a chair, and really the only one who had a physical disability. So they sent me to this 2-week camp, and we played wheelchair floor hockey, basketball, we went swimming, we played tennis. We did all of these different activities to give us a taste of it. And like I said, interact with each other and get to know other kids who were in the same situation as us. And in the same way that I recommend kids now look outward to others handling the pandemic, that was the same for me. I could look at other kids, or vice versa, they could look at me and learn from each other on how to handle. So that was my first bit into sports. And from that point on, I picked basketball because it was one of the most easily adaptable sports. At that time, we just played in our everyday chairs. And so my parents drove me to Edmonton once or twice a week to play with the team there. And it just continued on, and the competition got harder and higher. And I competed on the junior national team when I was about 13. And then I made the senior national team when I was 17 and competed in a tournament called it was called Gold Cup. And it was very similar to, or same level as the Olympics, just that it was only basketball.
Right. Well, that's cool. So you were competing at a super high level at a really young age, and kind of went through that. Now, I'm sure that part of that was your upbringing and the atmosphere you had at home. But what got you from being just a normal athlete to becoming kind of an elite athlete even at a young age. What was it that kind of drove you towards that?
I'm very innately highly competitive. I just
Hmm.
I don't really do things for fun. When I do things, it's always for competition. Like, you don't want to play cards or trivia with me or video games because none of it is really for fun or entertainment. It's always for competition. And so that just kind of kicked in again once I got back into sports. And my family are all not all the same. They're all athletic, but they're also, many of them are very competitive as well. So it's just kind of part of who we are, and that's what drove me forward, is just um, trying to be better myself and prove what I could do myself, as well as then win as a team. And being part of Team Canada is always an exciting experience.
Right. Cool. So we know that you got really good at wheelchair basketball, but then you took a little bit of a hiatus from competitive sports. And now, at least for the last 5 years, you've been competing at the highest level as a Paralympian in swimming. So totally shifted from, your wheelchair basketball to swimming. What happened there? Why did you decide to leave basketball behind and pursue a new sport?
Well, when I left basketball, I had no thoughts of other sports or Paralympics. I thought I was retiring from high level sports permanently. That was my plan at the time. I've been involved for so long, and um, as we all know, there are lots of reasons for leaving and retiring, and girls particularly often leave because of difficulties within a team or how they're being treated, and that was part of the reason of why I left at that time. And then when I got back into sports, it was originally just to be for fitness. Like I
Hmm.
thought I would just rebuild some fitness that I had lost and lose a little weight, gain some muscle back, make my life a bit easier. And then the competitiveness inside me kicked in, and I couldn't just be for those reasons anymore. So I started competing in triathlons that they were supposed to be just for fun, but they continued to be more and more competitive, either with longer distances or, again, I was typically the only para triathlete competing. So I knew that I couldn't win, but it was a win for me with every able-bodied person that I could beat. So I would just start counting them off as I went through the race. So that's where it started. And it was again, not, everyone's like, oh, this is great. It's so much fun. And I was like, yeah, but it's more than that. It's not just fun.
Right.
And then as para triathlon grew and became part of the Rio Paralympics, I thought, okay, this is way later in my life than I expected. I'm going to give one run toward the Paralympics. And in the end, my classification, within wheelchair sport or parasport, we compete against people who are most like us to keep it as fair as possible. So in my classification, they decided there weren't big enough numbers worldwide to have a strong enough depth of field. So they pulled it about 15 months before Rio. And that's when the coach that was doing my swim portion of paratriathlon asked me if I wanted to try swimming and see what happened. And that was 6 months before trials for Pan Am Games. But I went to my first meet and then went to trials the following April and made the team for Pan Am Games and World Championships that summer. And then it just took off from that point.
Right. So we'll get into your pro career here in a minute, but I'm a little curious about the training. Now, when you say, as you adjusted to these new things and went to a triathlon and stuff, I'm just thinking, when I did my first triathlon, I'm a horrible, horrible swimmer, but I thought, yeah, as a decent runner, I could do okay. And so I trained a little bit. And then as I got into the lake for the swim portion, yeah, I mean, this was so horrible. I was such a bad swimmer that they had a boat literally come next to me for the entire swim to make sure I wasn't going to drown. So they just paddled next to me until I finished the thing. I mean, you would have smoked me in that one. But as I got into triathlons, I realized that it took a ton of time. It's training for a triathlon is no small thing. Now, obviously, as a professional athlete, this is a full-time or near full-time gig where you're training a lot now. But when you started to increase from just doing it casually to getting competitive, what did that training look like? How much of your time was it taking, and how were you spending that time?
Yeah, it was a lot of time because I was spending, especially triathlon training, you're training for the three sports. So I was spending sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day training, and then you put on top of that meal prep and eating and recovery. And so most of my day was spent in training. And as I continued into swimming, it was still, even though it became one sport, because it was such a high level, it still was about the same. A little bit less physical hours training, so about 2 or 3 hours a day. But then there was a little bit more prep time, more mental training, visualization, other pieces added in. So currently it's still in that 2 to 3 hours a day for about 6 days a week. One day I usually have either a smaller training session or no training. But yeah, it's been a lot of hours of my life for the past 10 or 15 years.
Well, and most people would say, you know, anything more than a half hour, 45 minutes a day of exercise, that gets to be really disruptive to your life. Did you find like your life had to now be about sports, so you had to put a lot of the things aside when you started training, and now you're an athlete, and that's just what you do, and that's your job?
Yeah, it's just every day for me. It's just my life, and 45 minutes for me is just my warm up. And so when other people tell me they've done 45 minutes, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd just be getting going at that point finally. But so yeah, it just became, it's my full time. I love it. It's where I find a lot of happiness and joy as well. So it's easy for me to put the hours in.
That's incredible. Now, a lot of people don't understand the importance or the value of the world championships and even the Pan Am games, but I think we all know about the Paralympics. Can you explain kind of, maybe what your best moments were in those? You have a number of medals, you have some records and things like that. What was for you kind of the pinnacle of your achievement in competing as a Paralympian?
Well, in Rio at the games, I unfortunately had a really rough time. I got really sick when I was in the village. So I got pneumonia and didn't compete or perform the way that I was hoping to. But when the games were over and I had to look back, I had still set a Paralympic record for my classification. And I had to look back at the full journey. I couldn't just look at the 3 weeks that I was there competing or the 3 months of staging. I needed to look back at from the time that I was 6 years old and all that it had taken me to get there, and all the steps through, just getting back to school, getting back into athletics, playing high level basketball, just being independent, living on my own, because there was times when doctors didn't believe I would even do that. So I had to really be able to look at the full journey and celebrate and encompass all of it rather than just looking at the athletic achievement. And it took me some time to do that because, of course, we all want to go to the games and win a gold medal. That's what everybody's after. But I knew the gold wasn't going to be there for me. But I still had to find other things to celebrate and other moments to look at and to acknowledge as having been difficult to have achieved and to have been worth all the effort.
Yeah, I love that, because as the students who are watching this can think of their own lives and what they're working towards right now in their lives. And it's hard because a lot of our goals, we set these huge, big goals and we want to achieve those, but a lot of the victory is in the process. It's in getting there. And so I love your story because obviously you did still achieve amazing, wonderful things, but I like that perspective of looking at the whole journey, because that's something we can all relate to. Now, that being said, do you have a favorite moment in sports, kind of one of those things that you look back on and just think that was the best?
I think the first medal that I won at the Pan Am Games, because it was on home soil, so we competed in Toronto. Cool. And there's nothing like, all the other athletes that I've talked to, whether they're Olympians or Paralympians, who've had the opportunity to compete at a high level meet on home court, is different than anything else. And so I swam the 100, I swam the 50 free and the 100 free, and I got bronze in the 100 free that night. And I knew when I hit the wall and started, because it's 2 lengths, when I hit the wall and headed back, I could tell that I must have been, I thought I was doing well because of the crowd. I could actually hear the crowd. I could feel the vibration. They were stomping their feet. And I was in the pool with primarily, I think it was me and 7 Mexican swimmers. I think that was the whole field. And so, to have literally the whole stadium to be on my side, it was like something I'd never felt before, because I'd never competed on home soil. And it still gives me goosebumps and emotion. And right before I went out, there was in the ready room, there was a little TV in the back, and my husband and my brother and sister and my mom were sitting together, and just by total fluke, the camera flashed on them right when I was in the ready room on my way out. And so it's just kind of like one of those, everything fell into place. It was, exciting to know that they were there, and exciting to know that the whole crowd was Canadian and was on my side, and to hit that wall. The 100's not my favorite event. So I always just be like, okay, just hit the wall and turn and burn, turn and burn. And so when I hit that turn and had all that support behind me, I could actually pick up speed and go.
That's cool. How awesome. Now, I know when you go and speak to organizations or to different groups, one of the things that you speak about is passion equals victory. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's so important to really embrace and love what we're doing, and just to have that like heart and soul feel for it. And I know that not everything we do in life can be our favorite thing, but I think we have to grab on to our favorite things, and just know that if you put everything into it, that there will be victory at the end. It may not be the gold medal that I would love to have, but there's still going to be victory. And even in the things that we don't like, I also always try to say, like, love what you're doing, because at this moment, it might still be leading you down the path. So if you can still put your passion and heart into things that you don't love as much, there's still, again, going to be victory at the end of that. And when I'm doing a set, like, I like to train really hard. I like to train at a really high heart rate and VO2 max. Those are my thing. But I also have to train really low at times, really slow and low, and it's not my favorite. And I'm like, okay, but again, do this properly, do this with technique. It will, it has a purpose. It will get you where you're going. So I think if we can shift our focus to being, I hate this or I have to, oh, look what I get to do, and I'm going to put my heart into it, and that passion really feels victory.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, thank you so much, Tammy, for spending some time with us today. If kids want to follow your journey, or if they want to learn more about you, where's the best place for them to find you online?
Right now, I'm mostly on Twitter at TJ_Cunnington, and then they can also check out my website, TammyCunnington.com.
Perfect. We'll link those up. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.